On a Saturday afternoon in late August, 22-year-old Jordan Mitchell walked into Premier Auto Gallery in suburban Dallas, dressed in jeans and a university hoodie, carrying nothing but a driver's license and a pre-approval letter from his credit union, and watched as the sales associate who approached him, a middle-aged white man whose name tag read Rick Donovan, took one look at him and said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "Welcome to Premier. Can I help you find our used car section? It is around back where we keep the more affordable inventory," even though Jordan had walked straight past the used car lot outside and entered through the front doors that led directly to the new vehicle showroom, where a gleaming array of luxury sedans, sports cars and SUVs sat under bright lights like jewels in a case. Jordan, who had come to the dealership specifically to purchase a new BMW 3 Series as a graduation gift to himself, who had saved money from summer internships and had excellent credit built carefully over 4 years of responsible credit card use, who was the only son of Marcus Mitchell, the founder and CEO of Mitchell Automotive Group, a dealership empire that owned 43 franchises across Texas, including the very Premier Auto Gallery where Rick Donovan worked, felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever someone looked at him and made assumptions based on nothing more than the color of his skin. Jordan Mitchell had grown up in the automotive industry. His father, Marcus, had started as a mechanic in South Dallas in the early 1990s, working out of a small garage fixing cars for neighbors and friends, and had slowly built an empire through a combination of exceptional business acumen, relentless work ethic, and an unwavering commitment to treating customers with respect. Marcus had purchased his first dealership in 1998, a struggling Chevrolet franchise on the edge of bankruptcy, and had turned it around within 2 years. He had used the profits to acquire a second dealership, then a third, and by the time Jordan was in high school, Mitchell Automotive Group owned dealerships representing nearly every major brand, from Toyota to Mercedes-Benz to BMW. But Marcus had been adamant about one thing. He did not want Jordan to grow up as a rich kid who took his privilege for granted. Jordan had attended public schools, worked part-time jobs during high school, and paid for his own textbooks and personal expenses in college. Marcus had covered tuition and housing, but everything else Jordan had to earn. And when Jordan expressed interest in buying his first car after graduating from the University of Texas with a degree in business administration, Marcus had made him a deal. Jordan could purchase any car he wanted, but he had to do it on his own, without using the family name or connections to understand what the typical customer experience was like. "I want you to see how dealerships treat people when they walk in off the street," Marcus had told Jordan over breakfast the previous week. "I want you to experience the sales process, the financing, the negotiation, all of it, because one day you are going to be running this company and you need to understand what our customers go through." Jordan had agreed, excited about the challenge and the opportunity to prove he could handle a major purchase independently. He had done his research, comparing models and prices, and had settled on a BMW 3 Series, a car that was luxurious enough to feel like a reward for 4 years of hard work, but practical enough for his needs. He had applied for financing through his credit union and received a pre-approval for up to $60,000 at an excellent interest rate, thanks to the credit history he had carefully built. And he had chosen Premier Auto Gallery specifically because it was one of his father's dealerships, though he had no intention of revealing that connection unless absolutely necessary. He wanted to see how the staff treated an ordinary customer, particularly a young black customer, and whether the training and standards his father had implemented were actually being followed. Within 30 seconds of Rick Donovan's greeting, Jordan knew this was not going to go well. But he kept his expression neutral and his voice polite. "Actually, I am interested in a new BMW 3 Series. I saw online that you have several in stock." Rick's eyebrows rose slightly. "A new BMW? Okay, Well, those start around $45,000, and that is before taxes and fees. Are you sure that is in your budget? Jordan felt the condescension in the question, but pushed past it. I am pre-approved for financing up to $60,000. So yes, it is in my budget. Rick glanced at Jordan's hoodie and jeans, clearly skeptical. Pre-approved through your bank? Through my credit union? Yes. Well, pre-approvals are not guarantees. They are subject to verification. But let us take a look and see what we can do. Follow me. Rick led Jordan through the showroom to the BMW section, where three 3 Series sedans were on display in various colors and trim levels. Jordan immediately gravitated to a black 330i with the M Sport package, exactly the configuration he had researched. He walked around the car, noting the details, the clean lines, the quality of the finish. This one is nice, Jordan said. Can I see the window sticker? Rick pulled a laminated sheet from the windshield and handed it over. The MSRP was $52,000, well within Jordan's budget. So this model has the premium package, the M Sport package, adaptive cruise control, all the bells and whistles. It is a great car if you can afford it. If you can afford it. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. Jordan ignored it and studied the sticker. What kind of discount can you offer off MSRP? Rick laughed, a short, sharp sound. Discount? Buddy, BMWs are in high demand. We do not really discount these. If anything, there is usually a market adjustment because of limited availability. Jordan knew this was not true. He had researched the market extensively, and BMW 3 Series were widely available across the Dallas area, with most dealerships offering incentives and discounts to move inventory. Rick was either misinformed or deliberately trying to discourage him. I have seen other dealerships advertising discounts on similar models. Are you sure there is no flexibility on price? Rick's expression hardened. Look, I do not know what you have been reading online, but if you want this car, the price is what it is. Now, before we go any further, let us talk about financing. You said you have a pre-approval, but I am going to need to run a credit check to verify that. I already have a pre-approval letter. Here. Jordan pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to Rick. Rick glanced at it briefly. This is from a credit union. We work with multiple lenders who can often get better rates than credit unions. Let me run your credit through our system and see what we can find. Jordan hesitated. He did not particularly want Rick running his credit, but he also knew that this was standard practice in auto sales. All right. What do you need from me? I will need your driver's license and some basic information. Social security number, employment details, income verification. They walked to Rick's desk, a cluttered cubicle near the back of the showroom with photos of Rick's family and a plaque from some sales achievement years ago. Rick pulled out a credit application form and started filling in Jordan's information. When he got to the employment section, he asked, "So, where do you work?" "I just graduated from UT Austin. I start a job in finance next month." Rick looked up. "So you do not have a job right now?" "I have a signed offer letter with a starting salary of $85,000. Rick made a note on the form. "We will need to see that offer letter. But just so you know, most lenders prefer to see current employment, not future employment. It might be harder to get approved." Jordan pulled out his phone and showed Rick a copy of the offer letter he had saved. Rick studied it, then made a face. "Okay, let me see what I can do." He typed Jordan's information into the computer and submitted the credit application. After a moment, a report appeared on the screen. Rick studied it, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise, to something that looked almost like annoyance. Then he turned the screen slightly away from Jordan, as if he did not want him to see the results. "So," Rick said slowly, "your credit score is 728. That is decent. Not great, but decent." Jordan knew this was a lie. His credit score was 785, which was excellent for someone his age. He had checked it 2 days earlier on Credit Karma. "I thought 700 and above was considered good credit." "It is, But for a luxury vehicle like this, lenders prefer to see scores in the high 700s or even 800 plus. You are a little on the low side, which means the interest rate is going to be higher than what your credit union offered. Oh, what rate are you quoting? Let me check with our finance manager. Rick stood up and walked toward a glass-walled office at the back of the dealership, leaving Jordan sitting at the desk. Through the window, Jordan could see Rick talking to another man, both of them glancing back at Jordan. After a few minutes, Rick returned. Okay, so here is the deal. Our finance manager can get you approved, but the interest rate is going to be 7.9% for 72 months. Your monthly payment would be around $950. Jordan did the math quickly in his head. At that rate, he would be paying nearly $20,000 in interest over the life of the loan, far more than the 3.5% his credit union had offered. That does not sound right. My credit union pre-approved me at 3.5%. Rick shrugged. Like I said, credit unions quote rates, but they do not always follow through. Our lenders are more reliable, and honestly, with your credit score and your employment situation, 7.9 is pretty good. Jordan felt his anger building. Rick was trying to scam him, quoting an inflated interest rate to pad the dealership's profit. This was a common tactic in auto sales, particularly with younger buyers or buyers of color who might not know better. But Jordan had been raised in the industry. He knew exactly what Rick was doing. I think I will stick with my credit union financing, Jordan said firmly. Can we proceed with that? Rick's expression darkened. Look, kid, I am trying to help you here. If you want to use your credit union, fine. But you're going to need to have them send over the funds before we can finalize the sale. That could take days, whereas if you finance through us, you can drive the car home today. I am okay with waiting. Rick leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Let me be straight with you. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know when someone is a serious buyer and when someone is wasting my time. You walk in here in a hoodie, no appointment, no trade-in, with a pre-approval from some credit union, and you want to buy a $52,000 car. That does not exactly scream serious buyer. So if you are not interested in working with our financing, maybe you should come back when you are ready to do business the right way. The words hit Jordan like a slap. Rick was not just being condescending anymore. He was outright dismissive, implying that Jordan was not a legitimate customer, that he was wasting time, that he did not belong. And Jordan knew with absolute certainty that if he had been a young white man in a suit, Rick's tone would have been completely different. Jordan stood up. I think I am done here. Thank you for your time. Rick did not try to stop him. Good luck finding what you're looking for. Jordan walked out of the dealership, his hands shaking with anger and humiliation. He sat in his car, an older Honda Civic that had gotten him through college, and called his father. Marcus answered immediately. Hey, son, how did it go? Jordan told him everything. The dismissive greeting, the assumption about the used car section, the inflated interest rate, the condescending comments about his credit and employment, and Rick's final statement that Jordan was not a serious buyer and was wasting his time. When Jordan finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcus said, his voice dangerously calm, "What was the salesman's name?" "Rick Donovan." "And you are at Premier Auto Gallery in Plano?" "Yes." "Stay there. I am on my way." 20 minutes later, Marcus Mitchell pulled into the Premier Auto Gallery parking lot in his Mercedes S-Class, parked next to Jordan's Civic, and walked into the dealership with Jordan following behind. Marcus was 52 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that commanded attention. He was wearing slacks and a polo shirt with the Mitchell Automotive Group logo embroidered on the chest, and he walked with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Rick Donovan was at his desk talking to another customer when Marcus approached. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice polite but firm. "I need to speak with your general manager." Now, Rick looked up, saw Marcus, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Can I help you with something?" I am Marcus Mitchell. I own this dealership, and I need to speak with your GM immediately. Rick's face went pale. He stood up quickly. Mr. Mitchell, I did not know you were coming. Clearly. Where is the general manager? He is in his office. Let me get him. Rick practically ran to the GM's office, and a moment later, a man in his late 50s emerged, looking flustered. His name was Paul Hendricks, and he had been the general manager of Premier Auto Gallery for 3 years. Marcus had hired him based on his track record at another dealership, but they had never met in person, as Marcus typically delegated day-to-day operations to his regional managers. Mr. Mitchell, this is a surprise. What can I do for you? Marcus gestured to Jordan. This is my son, Jordan. He came in about an hour ago to purchase a BMW 3 Series. I want you to tell me how he was treated. Paul looked at Jordan, his confusion deepening. I was not aware we had any issues. Was there a problem? You tell me. Marcus turned to Rick, who was standing nearby, looking like he wanted to disappear. Rick, why do not you explain to Paul how you treated my son? Rick's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Marcus continued, his voice cold and measured. My son walked in here to buy a $52,000 car with pre-approved financing and excellent credit. And you, Rick, directed him to the used car section, questioned whether he could afford a new BMW, tried to push inflated financing on him, and then told him he was not a serious buyer and was wasting your time. Is that accurate? Rick stammered. I did not mean it that way. I was just trying to help him understand the process. By lying about his credit score, by quoting him an interest rate more than twice what he was pre-approved for, by implying he did not belong here. Mr. Mitchell, I swear I did not know he was your son. That is exactly the problem, Rick. You should treat every customer who walks through that door with respect, regardless of who they are or who their father is. But you did not. You saw a young black man in casual clothes, and you made assumptions. You decided he was not worth your time, and you violated every standard of customer service and fair lending that this company stands for. Paul stepped in. Mr. Mitchell, I apologize on behalf of the dealership. This is unacceptable. We will address this immediately. You are damn right you will. Rick is fired effective immediately. Get him out of here. Rick's face went red. You cannot fire me. I've been here for 6 years. I have a family. You discriminated against a customer, Marcus said, his voice like steel. You lied about financing options to inflate profit. And you violated fair lending laws. So yes, I can fire you, and I am. Get your things and leave. Rick looked at Paul, who nodded. You heard him, Rick. Clean out your desk. Rick walked back to his cubicle, grabbed a few personal items, and left without another word. After he was gone, Marcus turned to Paul. We need to talk. In your office. Now. Marcus, Paul, and Jordan went into the general manager's office, a wood-paneled room with a view of the showroom. Marcus closed the door and turned to Paul. How long have you been the GM here? 3 years. And in those 3 years, have there been other incidents like this? Other customers who were treated poorly because of their race? Paul hesitated. I mean, we get complaints occasionally. It is a dealership. Some customers are never satisfied. But I have not seen any pattern of discrimination. Have you looked? Marcus asked. Have you reviewed complaint data? Have you done secret shopper tests? Have you audited your sales staff to see if black customers are quoted higher interest rates or steered toward less expensive vehicles? We have standard training on fair lending and equal treatment. That is not what I asked. I asked if you have looked for patterns. No, not specifically. Marcus shook his head. Then you are not doing your job, because if what happened to Jordan today has happened to other customers, and you did not notice or did not care, then you are complicit. Paul looked stung. Mr. Mitchell, with respect, running a dealership is complex. I cannot monitor every interaction. No, but you can create systems to identify problems. You can track metrics. You can hold people accountable. And you clearly have not been doing that. Marcus paused, collecting his thoughts. Here is what is going to happen. First, you are going to pull the records for every customer who walked into this dealership in the past year and track their outcomes by race. I want to know if black customers are approved for financing at different rates than white customers. I want to know if they are steered toward different vehicles. I want to know if their credit scores are being accurately reported, or if salespeople are lying to them like Rick lied to Jordan. That is a lot of data to compile. Then you better get started. Second, you are going to implement a secret shopper program. I am going to send in testers, black and white, with identical financial profiles, and I am going to see how they are treated. If I find disparities, heads are going to roll. Third, you are going to retrain every single person on this staff on fair lending laws and customer service. And if anyone resists or fails to meet the standards, they are gone. Understood? Paul nodded, his face grim. Understood. Marcus turned to Jordan. Let us get you that car. They walked back out to the showroom, where the black BMW 330i was still sitting under the lights. Marcus found another salesperson, a younger man named Carlos, who looked nervous when Marcus approached. Carlos, my son is going to purchase this vehicle. He has pre-approved financing from his credit union at 3.5%. I want you to process the paperwork, deliver the car, and make sure he has an excellent experience. Can you do that? Carlos nodded quickly. Yes, sir, Mr. Mitchell, absolutely. Jordan and Carlos completed the paperwork over the next hour. The price was negotiated to $49,000, a reasonable discount off MSRP. The financing was straightforward, with the credit union transferring funds directly to the dealership. And by the end of the afternoon, Jordan was driving off the lot in his new BMW, his father following behind in the Mercedes. They reconvened at Marcus's house in North Dallas, a large home in a gated community. Jordan's mother, Diane, was waiting, and over dinner, Jordan recounted the experience once more. Diane, who had been a corporate attorney before becoming a full-time philanthropist, listened with a mixture of anger and sadness. This is exactly why I did not want Jordan doing this alone, Diane said. I knew something like this would happen. That is exactly why I wanted him to do it alone, Marcus countered, because this is what our customers go through every day. And if Jordan is going to run this company someday, he needs to understand that. Jordan pushed his food around his plate. I just do not get it. I had good credit, pre-approved financing, and I was ready to buy. Why did Rick treat me like that? Marcus sighed. Because he saw a young black man and made assumptions. He assumed you did not have money. He assumed you had bad credit. He assumed you were not a serious buyer. And those assumptions are based on stereotypes and racism. It does not matter that you were qualified. It does not matter that you did everything right. To Rick, you did not look like someone who belonged in that dealership. But you own the dealership, Diane said to Marcus. How did this happen under your watch? Because I was not watching closely enough, Marcus admitted. I trusted Paul to run the dealership according to our standards, but clearly he was not enforcing them. And Rick was able to get away with this behavior, probably for years, because no one was holding him accountable. Jordan looked at his father. So what happens now? Now we fix it. I'm going to audit every dealership in the Mitchell Automotive Group. I'm going to implement the secret shopper program across all 43 locations. I'm going to make sure that what happened to you today never happens to another customer. And I am going to make sure that everyone who works for me understands that discrimination is not tolerated. If you have ever walked into a space and been treated like you did not belong before anyone even spoke to you, hit that like button, because what Marcus uncovered over the next several months would reveal that Jordan's experience was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight across his entire dealership empire. Marcus spent the weekend thinking about what had happened and what it meant for his company. He had built Mitchell Automotive Group on the principle that every customer deserved respect, regardless of their background. He had implemented training programs, written policies, and hired leadership that he believed shared his values. But Jordan's experience had revealed a gap between policy and practice, between what Marcus expected and what was actually happening on the sales floors of his dealerships. On Monday morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. The team included his COO, a woman named Angela Torres, who had been with the company for 10 years, his CFO, David Kim, his head of human resources, Janice Wilson, and his regional managers, who oversaw clusters of dealerships across Texas. They gathered in the conference room at Mitchell Automotive Group's headquarters in Dallas, and Marcus laid out what had happened. On Saturday, my son went to buy a car at Premier Auto Gallery. He was treated with disrespect, lied to about his credit, and told he was wasting the salesman's time. That salesman, Rick Donovan, was fired on the spot, but the issue is bigger than one salesman. We need to know if this is an isolated incident or if it is happening at other locations. Angela leaned forward. Marcus, I am so sorry that happened to Jordan, and I agree we need to investigate. What are you thinking? I am thinking we do a comprehensive audit. We pull data on customer interactions, financing outcomes, and complaints for the past 3 years. We analyze it by race to see if there are disparities. And we implement a secret shopper program to test how our staff treats customers of different backgrounds. David Kim spoke up. That is a significant undertaking. The data analysis alone will take weeks, and secret shopper programs are expensive. I do not care about the cost, Marcus said flatly. I care about making sure we are not discriminating against customers. If we are, we fix it. If we are not, we prove it with data. Either way, we do the work. Janice Wilson, the HR director, nodded. I think this is the right approach. But Marcus, we need to be prepared for what we might find. If there are disparities, we are going to need to take action. That could mean firing more people, retraining entire staffs, and dealing with potential legal liability. I understand. But doing nothing is not an option. We start the audit this week. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus and his team conducted the most comprehensive review of dealership operations in the company's history. They hired an outside consulting firm that specialized in fair lending and consumer protection to analyze the data. The firm reviewed over 50,000 customer transactions across all 43 Mitchell Automotive Group dealerships, looking at financing approvals, interest rates, vehicle prices, and customer complaints. They also conducted secret shopper tests, sending matched pairs of black and white testers with identical financial profiles to each dealership to see how they were treated. The results, when they came back in mid-October, were sobering. The data analysis found that black customers across the Mitchell Automotive Group were, on average, quoted interest rates that were 0.8 percentage points higher than white customers with similar credit scores and income levels. They were also more likely to be steered toward used vehicles rather than new ones, even when they expressed interest in new cars. And they were less likely to receive discounts off MSRP, paying on average about $1,200 more for the same vehicles. The secret shopper results were even more disturbing. In 27 of the 43 dealerships, black testers reported being treated less warmly than white testers, waiting longer to be greeted, and receiving less detailed information about vehicles and financing options. In 12 dealerships, black testers were directed to used car sections, despite expressing interest in new vehicles, similar to what had happened to Jordan. And in 5 dealerships, black testers were quoted significantly higher interest rates than white testers, despite having identical credit profiles. Marcus read the report in his office, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he called Angela into his office and handed her the document. "Read this." Angela read silently for 10 minutes, her expression growing darker. When she finished, she looked up. "This is bad, Marcus. I know. We are talking about systemic issues across a significant portion of our dealerships. This is not just a few bad apples. This is a culture problem. I know, Marcus repeated. So we fix it. How? Marcus had been thinking about this question for days. We start by terminating anyone who engaged in clear discriminatory behavior. That is non-negotiable. Then we retrain everyone top to bottom on fair lending laws and customer service standards. We implement monitoring systems to catch disparities in real time, and we make it clear that anyone who discriminates will be fired. No exceptions. That is going to cause backlash. Some employees are going to push back. Some GMs are going to argue that you are overreacting. Let them. Anyone who has a problem with treating customers fairly can find another job. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus personally visited each of the 12 dealerships where secret shoppers had reported being directed to used car sections. At each location, he met with the general manager and the sales staff, shared the findings, and delivered an ultimatum: change or leave. At 4 dealerships, the GMs were terminated for failing to maintain adequate oversight. At 3 others, individual salespeople were fired for engaging in discriminatory practices. And at all 12, Marcus implemented immediate retraining and announced that he would be conducting follow-up secret shopper tests in 3 months. The terminations and the audit findings made headlines. The Dallas Morning News ran a story titled, "Mitchell Automotive Group Fires Employees Over Discrimination Allegations," which detailed the company's internal investigation and the actions taken. Conservative commentators criticized Marcus for what they called a politically correct witch hunt, arguing that he was punishing employees based on subjective interpretations of data. But civil rights advocates praised him for taking accountability seriously, and several customers who had experienced discrimination at Mitchell dealerships came forward to share their stories, validating the findings. One of those customers was a man named Darius Coleman, a 35-year-old engineer who had tried to purchase a truck from a Mitchell dealership in Fort Worth 2 years earlier. Darius had been pre-approved for financing through his bank, but had been told by the salesperson that his credit was not good enough for a new truck and that he should look at used vehicles. Darius had walked out without buying anything, assuming the salesperson was right. But when he saw the news coverage of Marcus's audit, he realized he had been discriminated against. He reached out to Marcus's office, and Marcus personally called him to apologize. "Mr. Coleman, I am Marcus Mitchell. I want to apologize for how you were treated at our dealership. What happened to you was wrong, and it should never have happened." Darius was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that, Mr. Mitchell. But an apology does not really make up for the fact that I had to go somewhere else and ended up paying more because your dealership told me I was not qualified. You are absolutely right. So here is what I would like to do. I would like to make you whole. If you can provide documentation of what you paid for the truck, I will refund the difference between what you paid and what you should have paid at our dealership. And I would like to invite you to participate in our new oversight committee, which will review customer complaints and hold us accountable." Darius paused. "An oversight committee?" "Yes, I am establishing an independent group of community members, customers, and advocates who will review our practices and make sure we are living up to our commitments. I would like you to be part of it. I will think about it. Please do. And again, I am sorry." Darius eventually agreed to join the oversight committee, along with 5 other community members, including a civil rights attorney, a consumer advocate, and 3 customers who had experienced various issues at Mitchell dealerships. The committee met quarterly to review complaint data, secret shopper results, and financing outcomes, and they had the authority to recommend discipline or policy changes. It was an unprecedented level of transparency for an automotive dealership group, and it signaled Marcus's commitment to accountability, but the work was far from over. The audit had revealed the problem, but fixing the culture required sustained effort. Marcus implemented a comprehensive training program for all sales staff, finance managers, and general managers across the Mitchell Automotive Group. The training, developed in partnership with the civil rights organization, covered implicit bias, fair lending laws, and customer service best practices. It was mandatory, and anyone who failed to complete it or who failed to meet the standards was terminated. Marcus also revised the company's compensation structure. Historically, salespeople and finance managers were paid on commission, which incentivized them to maximize profit on each transaction. But this structure also created incentives to overcharge customers, particularly customers who were less knowledgeable about the car buying process. Marcus introduced a hybrid compensation model that included a base salary plus performance bonuses tied not just to sales volume, but to customer satisfaction scores and compliance with fair lending standards. Employees who consistently received high customer satisfaction ratings and who showed no disparities in how they treated customers of different races earned higher bonuses. Those who did not were counseled or terminated. The changes were expensive and disruptive. Several high-performing salespeople left, complaining that the new system limited their earning potential. A few general managers resigned, saying they did not want to deal with the increased oversight. And in the short term, sales at some dealerships declined as staff adjusted to the new expectations. But Marcus held firm. He knew that short-term pain was necessary for long-term change, and he was willing to absorb the costs. 6 months after Jordan's experience at Premier Auto Gallery, Marcus conducted a follow-up secret shopper test across all 43 dealerships. The results showed significant improvement. In 38 of the 43 locations, black and white testers reported being treated similarly, with no significant disparities in wait times, information provided, or courtesy shown. In 5 locations, minor disparities remained, and Marcus ordered additional training and monitoring. But overall, the data suggested that the changes were working. Jordan, who had been following the process closely, was proud of his father but also reflective. One evening over dinner, he asked Marcus, "Do you think this would have happened if I had not gone through what I did? Would you have ever looked into this if it had not affected me personally?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I do not know. I like to think I would have noticed eventually, but the truth is I was not paying close enough attention. I trusted my managers to do the right thing, and I did not verify that they were. So yes, your experience was a wake-up call. And I am grateful for it, even though I hate that you had to go through it. Do you think the changes will last, or will people go back to their old ways once the scrutiny dies down? That is why we have the Oversight Committee, the secret shoppers, and the data monitoring. The changes will last as long as we stay vigilant. The moment we stop paying attention, the problems will come back. So we cannot stop paying attention." Jordan nodded. He had decided to join the family business after graduation, starting in an entry-level role at one of the dealerships to learn operations from the ground up. And he was determined to carry forward the lessons from his experience, to make sure that every customer who walked into a Mitchell Automotive Group dealership felt welcome and respected. 5 years after Jordan's experience, the Mitchell Automotive Group was a different company. The cultural transformation that Marcus had initiated had taken root, and the results were evident in the data. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, particularly among Black and Latino customers who had historically reported lower satisfaction. Complaint rates were down, and the company's reputation had improved, with Mitchell Automotive Group being recognized by multiple organizations as a leader in fair lending and diversity in the automotive industry. Jordan, now 27, had worked his way up to a management position, overseeing operations at 3 dealerships in the Dallas area. He had taken the lessons from his own experience and applied them rigorously, implementing regular training, monitoring metrics closely, and holding staff accountable. And he had become an advocate within the company for continued progress, pushing for new initiatives and refusing to let complacency set in. One of those initiatives was a partnership with local high schools and community colleges to create pathways for young people of color to enter the automotive industry. Jordan worked with educators to develop curriculum, offered internships at Mitchell dealerships, and provided scholarships for students pursuing careers in automotive technology, sales, or management. The program was designed to address the lack of diversity in the industry and to create opportunities for people who might not otherwise have access to them. But Jordan also knew that the work was never finished. Discrimination was not something you solved once and then moved on from. It required constant vigilance, constant effort, and constant willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And he was committed to that work, not just because his father expected it, but because he had experienced firsthand what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, and disrespected. And he was determined to make sure that no one else who walked into a Mitchell dealership ever felt that way again. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that systems do not change by accident, but through intentional, sustained effort, because what Marcus and Jordan built over the next decade would become a model not just for the automotive industry, but for any business grappling with how to turn good intentions into actual equity. 10 years after Jordan's experience, Marcus Mitchell stood in front of a packed auditorium at the National Automobile Dealers Association annual convention, delivering a keynote address on the business case for fair lending and inclusive customer service. The speech was titled, "From Incident to Impact: How One Customer's Experience Changed Our Company," and it detailed the journey that Mitchell Automotive Group had undertaken, from the initial audit to the cultural transformation, to the ongoing commitment to equity. When my son walked into one of my dealerships and was discriminated against, Marcus told the audience, it was a gut punch, not just because he is my son, but because it revealed a failure of leadership on my part. I had built systems and policies, but I had not ensured they were being followed. I had assumed that good intentions were enough. They were not. He clicked to the next slide, which showed graphs comparing customer outcomes before and after the changes. What we learned was that discrimination is not just a moral failing, it is a business failing. When you treat customers unfairly, you lose their trust, you lose their business, and you lose the opportunity to serve entire communities. Over the past 10 years, we've increased our market share among Black and Latino customers by 35%, not by lowering standards or offering special deals, but by treating people with respect and fairness. That is good ethics and good business. The speech was well received, and afterward, dozens of dealers approached Marcus to ask how they could implement similar programs at their own dealerships. Marcus shared resources, connected them with consultants, and offered to mentor those who were serious about change. And he challenged them to look at their own data, to conduct their own secret shopper tests, and to be willing to confront uncomfortable truths about their own practices. But not everyone was on board. Some dealers pushed back, arguing that Marcus was setting unrealistic standards, that some level of disparity was inevitable, and that focusing too much on equity would hurt profitability. Marcus's response was always the same. If your business model depends on treating some customers worse than others, then your business model is broken. 15 years after Jordan's experience, Jordan was 37 years old and had been named president of Mitchell Automotive Group, taking over day-to-day operations while Marcus transitioned into a chairman role. Jordan's first major initiative was to expand the secret shopper program beyond racial equity, to include testing for gender discrimination, age discrimination, and disability discrimination. The expanded program revealed that women were often quoted higher interest rates than men with similar credit, that older customers were sometimes dismissed as not understanding technology, and that customers with disabilities faced physical and attitudinal barriers at some locations. Jordan addressed each of these issues with the same rigor his father had applied to racial discrimination. He implemented additional training, revised policies, and made physical improvements to ensure dealerships were accessible. And he established a culture where employees understood that every customer, regardless of their identity, deserved excellent service. Under Jordan's leadership, Mitchell Automotive Group continued to grow, acquiring additional dealerships and expanding into new markets. But growth was always balanced with a commitment to equity and accountability. Jordan refused to acquire dealerships that had poor records on customer treatment, and he was willing to walk away from deals if he did not believe the sellers shared his values. 20 years after Jordan's experience, Marcus Mitchell was 72 years old and fully retired, spending his time on philanthropic work and mentoring young entrepreneurs. Jordan was firmly in charge of the company, and he had taken it to new heights, both in terms of financial performance and social impact. Mitchell Automotive Group now owned 67 dealerships across 3 states, employed over 4,000 people, and was widely regarded as one of the most ethical and customer-focused automotive companies in the country. But the story that everyone still talked about was the one from 20 years earlier, when a young black man walked into a dealership to buy his first car and was treated with disrespect, only for the salesman to discover that the customer's father owned the company. The story had become legend, retold in training sessions, referenced in industry publications, and cited as an example of how individual experiences of discrimination could catalyze institutional change. Jordan, now 42, was invited to speak at his alma mater, the University of Texas, to a group of business students about leadership and ethics. He told them the story of that day at Premier Auto Gallery, the humiliation he had felt, and the determination it had sparked in him and his father to make things better. "That experience taught me something important," Jordan told the students. "It taught me that your privilege, your resources, your power, none of that protects you from discrimination, but it does give you the ability to respond. Some people who experience discrimination become bitter or resigned. I chose to use my experience to create change, not just for myself, but for everyone who comes after me." He paused, looking around the room. "And here is the thing. You do not have to be the son of a dealership owner to make a difference. Every one of you, in whatever career you pursue, will have opportunities to either perpetuate injustice or challenge it. You will see colleagues treated unfairly. You will see customers dismissed. You will see systems that benefit some people at the expense of others. And you will have to decide, do I speak up or do I stay silent? Do I push for change or do I accept the status quo?" A student raised her hand. "But what if you do not have power? What if you are just starting out and you do not have the authority to change things?" Jordan smiled. "You have more power than you think. You have the power to document what you see. You have the power to report it to people who can do something about it. You have the power to refuse to participate in discrimination. And you have the power to build a network of people who share your values and who will support you when you take a stand. Change does not always come from the top. Sometimes it starts with one person at the bottom saying, 'This is not right, and I am not going to be part of it.'" The students applauded, and after the talk, several of them approached Jordan to share their own experiences with discrimination and to ask for advice. Jordan listened to each of them, offered guidance where he could, and encouraged them to keep pushing, to keep fighting, to keep believing that change was possible. 25 years after Jordan's experience, Mitchell Automotive Group celebrated its 50th anniversary. The company threw a gala at a hotel in Dallas, inviting employees, customers, community leaders, and industry partners to celebrate. Marcus, now 77 and still sharp despite his age, gave a speech reflecting on the journey. "When I started this company 50 years ago," Marcus said, "I was a mechanic with a dream. I wanted to build something that would provide for my family and serve my community, and I wanted to do it with integrity. But integrity is not just about being honest in your transactions. It is about treating people fairly. It is about recognizing when you have fallen short and being willing to do the hard work to make it right. He looked at Jordan, who was standing nearby. 25 years ago, my son walked into one of our dealerships and was treated in a way that violated everything I thought we stood for, and that experience forced us to reckon with the gap between our values and our practices. It was painful, it was expensive, it was disruptive, but it was necessary, and I am grateful for it because it made us better. Marcus turned back to the audience. Mitchell Automotive Group is not perfect. We still make mistakes. We still have work to do. But we are committed to that work. We are committed to treating every customer with dignity. We are committed to creating opportunities for people who have been historically excluded. And we are committed to being a company that does not just talk about values, but lives them. That is my legacy. That is what I hope we are remembered for. The applause was sustained, and after the speech, Marcus and Jordan stood together, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. One of the guests was Rick Donovan, the salesman who had been fired 25 years earlier for discriminating against Jordan. Rick had reached out to Marcus a few months before the gala, asking if he could attend. Marcus had agreed, curious about what Rick wanted to say. Rick approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Mitchell, Jordan, thank you for letting me come tonight." Marcus nodded. "Rick, it has been a long time." "It has. I wanted to say something I should have said 25 years ago. I was wrong. What I did to Jordan was wrong. I let my assumptions and biases dictate how I treated him, and I am ashamed of that. I lost my job, my reputation, and a lot of respect from my family because of what I did, and I deserved all of it." Jordan looked at Rick, seeing a man who had aged considerably, who looked tired and humbled. "What have you been doing since then?" "I worked at a few other dealerships, but word got around about why I was fired from Mitchell. Eventually, I left the industry altogether. I have been doing construction work for the past 15 years, and I have tried to be a better person. I do not know if I have succeeded, but I have tried." Marcus studied Rick for a moment. "Why did you want to come tonight?" "Because I wanted you to know that what happened 25 years ago changed me too. Not in the way it changed you or this company, but it made me confront things about myself that I had been avoiding. My racism, my assumptions, my willingness to treat people unfairly. And I have spent the past 25 years trying to unlearn those things. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your decision to fire me, as hard as it was, probably saved me from becoming an even worse person." Jordan looked at his father, then back at Rick. "I appreciate you saying that, and I am glad you have tried to grow, but I want you to understand something. You were not just rude to me that day. You violated my dignity. You made me feel like I did not belong in a space I had every right to be in. And that is something I will never forget. So while I appreciate your apology, I also want you to know that the work of becoming a better person is never finished. You do not get to apologize once and then move on. You have to keep doing the work every day for the rest of your life." Rick nodded, his eyes glistening. "I understand, and I will." He walked away, and Marcus put a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "That took courage, both from him to come here and from you to be honest with him." "Do you think people can really change?" Jordan asked. "I think some people can. I think it depends on whether they are willing to confront their own failings and do the work. Rick seems like he has tried. Whether he has succeeded, I do not know. But I'm glad we gave him the space to say what he needed to say." Jordan nodded, and they returned to the celebration, surrounded by employees, customers, and friends who had been part of the Mitchell Automotive Group journey. And Jordan felt a sense of pride, not just in what the company had accomplished, but in the values it had upheld, the changes it had made, and the lives it had touched. 30 years after Jordan's experience, he was 52 years old and the sole owner of Mitchell Automotive Group, having purchased his father's remaining shares after Marcus's retirement. Jordan had continued to expand the company, now operating over 80 dealerships across 5 states, and had maintained the commitment to equity and accountability that his father had established. The company was regularly recognized as a top employer, a leader in customer service, and a model for ethical business practices. But Jordan's proudest accomplishment was not the size of the company or the awards it had won. It was the culture he had helped build, the systems he had put in place, and the thousands of customers who had been treated with respect and dignity because of the changes his father had initiated 3 decades earlier. He thought often about that day at Premier Auto Gallery, about how a moment of humiliation had become a catalyst for transformation, and about how individual experiences of injustice could ripple outward to create institutional change. Jordan had a daughter now, Zoe, who was 15 years old and already talking about joining the family business. She was smart, passionate, and deeply committed to social justice, and Jordan knew she would be a fierce advocate for equity when her time came. He had started taking her to dealerships, showing her the operations, introducing her to employees, and teaching her the lessons he had learned from his father. And he told her the story of that day 30 years earlier, not to make her afraid, but to help her understand the importance of vigilance, the cost of complacency, and the power of accountability. "When I walked into that dealership," Jordan told Zoe one afternoon as they toured a Mitchell facility in Houston, "I thought I was just buying a car. I had no idea it would become the defining moment of my career, but that is how change often happens. It starts with one person experiencing something unjust and deciding to do something about it, and then, if you are lucky, other people join you, and the change becomes bigger than any one individual." Zoe looked around the dealership, at the diverse staff, the welcoming atmosphere, the systems in place to ensure every customer was treated fairly. "Do you think it could happen again? Do you think someone could walk in here and be discriminated against?" "It is possible," Jordan admitted. "Systems are only as good as the people who operate them. That is why we have the secret shopper program, the data monitoring, the oversight committee, because we can never assume that everything is fine. We have to keep checking, keep testing, keep holding ourselves accountable." "That sounds exhausting." Jordan smiled. "It is, but it is also necessary, because the alternative is allowing discrimination to flourish unchecked. And I would rather be exhausted from fighting injustice than complicit in perpetuating it." Zoe nodded, and Jordan could see in her eyes the same determination, the same sense of purpose that had driven him and his father. And he felt confident that when Zoe eventually took over the company, she would carry forward the legacy they had built, the values they had fought for, and the commitment to treating every person who walked through their doors with respect and dignity. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because the lesson here is not just about one family or one company, but about the responsibility we all have to confront discrimination wherever we find it, to use our experiences of injustice as fuel for change, and to build institutions that reflect our highest values rather than our deepest biases. 35 years after Jordan's experience, Marcus Mitchell passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by his family. The obituaries celebrated his life as a pioneering entrepreneur, a leader in the automotive industry, and a champion of equity and fair lending. But the thing people remembered most was the story of how his son's experience of discrimination had become a turning point, not just for Mitchell Automotive Group, but for the broader conversation about how businesses treat customers and how leaders respond when their institutions fall short. At Marcus's memorial service, held at a church in Dallas, hundreds of people gathered to pay their respects. Employees, customers, community leaders, and industry partners all came to honor a man who had built something extraordinary. Jordan gave the eulogy, standing at the podium with his daughter Zoe beside him, and he spoke about his father's life, his values, and his legacy. "My father was not perfect," Jordan said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "He made mistakes. He trusted people who let him down. He did not always see problems until they were right in front of him. But when he did see them, he acted. When I told him what had happened to me at Premier Auto Gallery 35 years ago, he did not make excuses. He did not minimize it. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He came to the dealership, he confronted the problem, and he committed to making sure it never happened again. And then he did the work. For the rest of his life, he did the work." Jordan paused, looking out at the crowd. "That is what I want my father to be remembered for. Not just the business he built, but the values he upheld, the belief that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, the commitment to accountability, the willingness to change when change is needed. Those are the things that matter. Those are the things that last." After the service, Jordan stood in the church lobby, accepting condolences and sharing stories with people who had known his father. One of those people was Darius Coleman, the engineer who had joined the oversight committee decades earlier and had become a close friend of the family. Darius pulled Jordan aside. "Your father changed my life," Darius said, "not because he gave me money or a job, but because he showed me that institutions can change, that people in power can choose to do the right thing, and that my voice mattered. I will always be grateful for that." Jordan nodded, feeling the weight of his father's legacy. "He would have been grateful to you too. You held us accountable. You made sure we did not backslide. That matters just as much." Darius smiled. "You are going to carry it forward. I know you will." "I am going to try." 40 years after Jordan's experience, Jordan was 62 years old and preparing to retire, handing over the company to Zoe, who was now 30, and had spent the past 8 years working her way up through the organization. Zoe had proven herself to be a capable leader, deeply committed to the values her grandfather had established and her father had maintained. And she had ideas for how to push the company even further, to address emerging challenges like environmental sustainability, digital equity, and economic opportunity in underserved communities. On Zoe's first day as CEO, Jordan took her to Premier Auto Gallery, the dealership where it had all started. They stood in the showroom, looking at the cars, the customers, the staff. The dealership had been renovated several times over the decades, but the core structure was the same building where Jordan had been dismissed 40 years earlier. "This is where it happened," Jordan said, pointing to a spot near the entrance. "That is where I walked in, and Rick directed me to the used car section, and that is where everything changed." Zoe looked around, taking it in. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not told Dad? If you had just bought a car somewhere else and moved on?" "All the time. But I did tell him, and he did something about it, and that made all the difference." "I am not going to let it slide," Zoe said firmly. "I am going to keep pushing, keep holding us accountable, keep making sure we live up to the values that Granddad established." Jordan smiled. "I know you will. That is why I am confident leaving this company in your hands." They walked out of the dealership together, and as they stood in the parking lot, Jordan thought about the journey that had begun 40 years earlier, about the humiliation and anger he had felt, about his father's determination to make things right, and about the thousands of customers and employees whose lives had been touched by the changes that followed. It had not been easy. It had required constant vigilance, difficult decisions, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But it had been worth it. Because Mitchell Automotive Group was not just a business. It was a testament to the belief that institutions could change, that discrimination could be confronted and dismantled, and that doing the right thing was not just morally correct, but essential to long-term success. 45 years after Jordan's experience, Mitchell Automotive Group was celebrating its 75th anniversary. The company now operated over 100 dealerships across 8 states, employed over 6,000 people, and was consistently ranked as one of the best companies to work for in the automotive industry. Zoe, now 35, had been CEO for 5 years and had continued to innovate and expand while maintaining the core values that define the company. The anniversary celebration included a major community event, with scholarships awarded to students from underserved communities, donations to civil rights organizations, and the unveiling of a new training center dedicated to equity and inclusion in the automotive industry. The center, named the Marcus and Jordan Mitchell Center for Ethical Leadership, would provide training, resources, and research on how businesses could create more equitable practices and hold themselves accountable. At the unveiling ceremony, Zoe gave a speech that reflected on the past and looked toward the future. 45 years ago, she began, my father walked into one of our dealerships and was treated in a way that violated everything this company stands for. That experience could have been just another story of discrimination, another example of how systems fail people. But my grandfather decided to turn it into something different. He decided to use it as a catalyst for change. And that decision, that commitment, has shaped everything we have become. She paused, looking at the audience. But the work is not done. Discrimination still exists. Bias still exists. Systems still fail people. And every generation has to decide, are we going to accept that, or are we going to fight it? I choose to fight it. And I hope you will too, because that is what my grandfather taught us. That is what my father taught us. And that is what we will teach the next generation. That change is possible, that accountability matters, and that the work of justice is never finished, but is always worth doing. The applause was thunderous, and as Zoe stepped down from the podium, she felt the weight of the legacy she had inherited and the responsibility to carry it forward. She thought about her grandfather Marcus, who had built the company from nothing, and her father Jordan, who had experienced discrimination and turned it into a mission. And she thought about all the customers, employees, and community members whose lives had been touched by their work. And she made a promise to herself, to her family, and to everyone who depended on Mitchell Automotive Group, that she would never stop fighting for equity, never stop holding the company accountable, and never stop believing that a more just world was possible, because that was the legacy she had been given. And that was the legacy she would pass on. 50 years after Jordan's experience, Jordan was 72 years old, living in retirement but still involved with the company as a board member and advisor. Mitchell Automotive Group was now one of the largest dealership groups in the country, a testament to the values that Marcus had established and that Jordan and Zoe had maintained. And the story of that day at Premier Auto Gallery 50 years earlier was still told in training sessions, referenced in industry publications, and cited as an example of how individual experiences could catalyze institutional transformation. Jordan's grandchildren, the next generation of potential Mitchell leaders, were now teenagers and young adults, and Jordan had started telling them the story, just as he had told Zoe when she was young. He wanted them to understand where they came from, what their family had fought for, and why it mattered. Because the work of building just institutions was not the responsibility of one generation. It was the responsibility of every generation, passed down like a torch, carried forward by people who believed that the world could be better and who were willing to do the work to make it so. And as Jordan reflected on the 50 years since that transformative day, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the experience of discrimination itself, which had been painful and humiliating, but for what had come from it. The changes his father had made, the culture they had built, the lives they had touched, the belief that accountability was not just a buzzword, but a practice, lived out every day in every interaction. That was the legacy of Marcus Mitchell. That was the legacy of Jordan Mitchell. And that was the legacy that would continue as long as people were willing to confront injustice, hold themselves accountable, and believe that change was possible. Because that was the lesson of that day 50 years earlier, when a young black man walked into a dealership to buy his first car, was treated with disrespect by a salesman who did not know his father owned the company, and decided that enough was enough. That moment of injustice had become a catalyst for transformation, and 50 years later, the transformation was still unfolding, still growing, still proving that when people refuse to accept discrimination, when they demand better, and when they do the hard work of changing institutions, a more just world becomes possible. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because the lesson here transcends one family, one company, or one incident. It is a lesson about the responsibility we all carry to confront bias when we see it, to use our experiences of injustice as motivation for change, and to build systems that reflect our values rather than our prejudices. It is a lesson about the courage required to acknowledge when institutions have failed, the commitment required to fix them, and the vigilance required to ensure that the changes last. And it is a lesson about legacy, about what we pass down to the next generation, about whether we leave the world better than we found it. That is what Marcus Mitchell did. That is what Jordan Mitchell did. That is what Zoe Mitchell is doing. And that is what each of us is called to do, in whatever sphere of influence we occupy, with whatever power we possess, for as long as we draw breath, because that is how change happens. Not through grand gestures or single moments, but through the accumulation of daily choices, the persistence of committed people, and the belief that a more just world is not a distant dream, but a present possibility, if only we have the courage to fight for it.